The rain hammered against the windows of the penthouse as Kendra Davis watched something impossible unfold before her eyes. Jin Nam, the 7-year-old boy who hadn't moved a single muscle in 3 years, according to every medical report, every specialist consultation, every desperate prayer his father had whispered into the darkness, that same boy was standing. Not just standing, running. His small feet moved across the hardwood floor with the desperate speed of a child who'd been trapped too long, chasing after Zahara's bright yellow ball that had rolled beneath the grand piano. The sound of his laughter, a sound his father, Nam, had been told he'd never hear again, filled the massive room like bells. "Zahara, wait!" Kendra's voice cracked as she stumbled forward, her professional mind screaming that this violated every law of medicine she knew, while her heart understood something far simpler. Her 6-year-old niece had somehow unlocked what dozens of specialists couldn't. Behind her, the door opened. She heard Hail's sharp intake of breath, felt the dangerous energy that always preceded his presence. But when she turned to face the man whose reputation made grown men tremble, she saw something she'd never witnessed in their 2 months together. Tears streaming down the face of Seattle's most feared crime lord. Kendra Davis had learned early that life demanded more than it gave. At 29, she'd already buried her sister and brother-in-law, inherited a grieving 6-year-old, and rebuilt her entire existence around the fragile foundation of survival and hope. The rain-soaked streets of Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood had become her proving ground, a place where she worked 3 physical therapy appointments before noon, picked up Zahara from her grandmother's house, and tried to pretend her checking account wasn't perpetually gasping for air. "Auntie Ken, can we get the pretty cereal today?" Zahara's voice drifted from the back seat of Kendra's 15-year-old Honda Civic, innocent in the way only children could be when they didn't understand that pretty cereal cost $2 more than the store brand. "We'll see, baby girl." Kendra's standard answer for no wrapped in possibility. She caught her niece's eyes in the rearview mirror, those same warm brown eyes her sister Diane had passed down, framed by the neat cornrows Kendra had spent 2 hours perfecting last Sunday. Zahara deserved pretty cereal. She deserved a mother who wasn't buried in Lakeview Cemetery, a father who hadn't died beside her in that intersection when a drunk driver ran a red light. She deserved more than an aunt who loved her fiercely but couldn't quite fill the holes left behind. "It's okay." Zahara's small voice carried the kind of understanding that broke Kendra's heart daily. "Grammy's cereal tastes good too." The physical therapy clinic where Kendra worked occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in Georgetown, wedged between a craft brewery and an auto body shop. Her boss, Dr. Patricia Chen, had called her in early that morning with an urgency that didn't match her usual calm demeanor. "Kendra, I need you to take a consultation this afternoon." "Doctor," Chen's voice had carried weight through the phone. "It's complicated. High-profile client, the kind who doesn't take no for an answer." Now, standing in Dr. Chen's office while Zahara colored at the children's table in the waiting room, Kendra studied the file before her. Jin Nam, 7 years old, diagnosed with complete paralysis following a traumatic incident 3 years prior, no physical damage to the spinal cord, no neurological explanation. Psychological trauma suspected but unconfirmed. The child hadn't spoken since the incident. "He's seen everyone," Dr. Chen said, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, specialists from Seoul. 18 months of intensive physical therapy with no results. His father is persistent." "What happened to him?" Kendra turned the page, studying the haunting photo of a small Korean boy with enormous dark eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. "That's where it gets delicate." Dr. Chen's voice dropped. "His mother was killed in front of him during a home invasion. The boy hasn't moved voluntarily since. Every test shows he should be physically capable, but—" She gestured helplessly. "The mind is complicated." Kendra's chest tightened, thinking of Zahara's nightmares, the way her niece sometimes froze when sirens wailed past their apartment. Trauma lived in the body, locked itself into muscles and bones until someone found the right key. "The father's name is Nam," Dr. Chen continued. "He owns several businesses, import, export primarily. He's been referred to us by Dr. Yoon at Seattle Children's. They want someone with your specific expertise in pediatric cases involving psychological components." Something in Dr. Chen's carefully neutral tone made Kendra pause. "What aren't you telling me?" Her boss met her eyes directly. "Mr. Nam is a very powerful man in certain communities. He expects results, but he also—" She hesitated. He's desperate, Kendra. I've never seen a parent more devoted to finding help for their child. Whatever else he might be, he's a father who would move mountains for his son. The consultation was scheduled for 4 o'clock at the Nam residence, a penthouse in one of Seattle's most exclusive buildings downtown. Kendra had exactly 3 hours to prepare, and a 6-year-old who couldn't be left alone. "Can Grammy watch Zahara?" Dr. Chen asked gently. Kendra shook her head. Her mother worked double shifts at the hospital 3 days a week, and this was one of them. "I'll have to bring her. She's good in new places, quiet as a mouse." What Kendra didn't say was that Zahara had become almost too quiet since her parents' death. The bright, chattering child who used to narrate her entire day had learned to make herself small, unobtrusive. Sometimes Kendra missed the noise. The building's lobby gleamed with the kind of wealth that made Kendra acutely aware of her Target blazer and the scuff on her right shoe. A security guard who looked like he could bench press her car checked her credentials with military precision before directing her to a private elevator. "Ms. Davis?" A woman in an impeccable black suit met them on the penthouse floor. "I'm Mrs. Cho, Mr. Nam's executive assistant. He's waiting in the therapy room." Zahara's small hand tightened around Kendra's fingers as they followed Mrs. Cho through a sprawling space that felt more like a museum than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Seattle's skyline, the Space Needle rising in the distance. Everything spoke of money, the kind that built empires and crushed obstacles. The therapy room was different, softer. Every piece of adaptive equipment was top of the line, but someone had taken care to make it welcoming. Colorful mats, gentle lighting, a section filled with toys that looked untouched. And in the center of the room, in a specialized wheelchair, sat Eugene Nam. Kendra's professional assessment took over immediately. The boy's posture was perfectly supported, but utterly still. His eyes, those same haunting eyes from the photo, tracked her movement with sharp intelligence. Not paralyzed cognitively, then. Whatever locked his body also left his mind acutely aware and trapped. "You must be Ms. Davis." The voice came from behind her, and every nerve in Kendra's body suddenly stood at attention. She turned to find a man who seemed to command gravity itself, pulling focus, demanding acknowledgement without saying a word. Hasil Nam was younger than she'd expected, perhaps late 30s, with the kind of features that would stop traffic. But it was his eyes that held her, dark and deep, and carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much and survived it all. He wore a simple black shirt and dark pants, but the clothes probably cost more than her monthly rent. A subtle tattoo curved along the left side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. "Mr. Nam." Kendra extended her hand, keeping her voice steady. "Thank you for the opportunity to work with Eugene." His handshake was firm but brief, his gaze already moving to Zahara. "You brought a child." It wasn't quite a question. Wasn't quite an accusation. Kendra lifted her chin. "My niece, Zahara. She lost her parents 8 months ago. I'm her guardian and I don't have childcare today. She'll stay quiet in the corner while I do the assessment. If that's a problem, I can reschedule." Something flickered in Hail's expression. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. "No, it's fine." He moved toward his son, and Kendra noticed the way his entire demeanor shifted, hardness melting into something achingly gentle. "Eugene, this is the new therapist Dr. Yoon told you about." The boy's eyes moved to Kendra, and she saw recognition there, not of her specifically, but of what she represented. Another stranger who would poke and prod and eventually give up like all the others. But then Eugene's gaze found Zahara, and something changed. The smallest shift, barely perceptible, but Kendra had spent 3 years studying micro-movements in damaged bodies. She saw it. Interest. Zahara, bless her, didn't see a paralyzed boy or an intimidating setting. She saw another kid. "Hi," she whispered, her small voice barely audible. "I like your chair. It looks like a spaceship." Eugene blinked, once, twice, and Kendra could have sworn she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Behind her, Hail Nam drew in a sharp breath. In 18 months of therapy, his son had never responded to anyone, until now. Kendra had conducted hundreds of pediatric assessments, but none under the watchful gaze of a man who radiated the kind of danger that made her pulse skip. Hail Nam stood by the window, arms crossed, his silhouette dark against the Seattle skyline as she worked through her initial evaluation of Eugene. The boy's medical file told a story of tragedy, written in clinical terms. 3 years ago, at age 4, Eugene had been in the family's previous home when intruders broke in. His mother, Min Seo, had hidden him in a bedroom closet, had whispered for him to stay silent no matter what he heard. He'd obeyed. He'd listened to everything, the shouting, his mother's pleading, the gunshots that ended her life. When Hay-Il had returned home 2 hours later, he'd found his wife dead, and his son rigid in the closet, eyes open but unseeing, body locked into a position he'd maintained ever since. Every specialist had concluded the same thing. The physical capacity for movement existed, but psychological trauma had created a conversion disorder so profound that Eugene's mind had essentially shut down his body's motor functions. He was a prisoner in his own flesh. "Can you feel this, sweetheart?" Kendra pressed gently on Eugene's calf, watching his eyes for response. He blinked, his only reliable communication. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. It was the single system he'd developed with his father. 1 blink. Yes. He felt it. Kendra worked methodically, testing reflexes, muscle tone, sensory response. Everything functioned perfectly on a physiological level. This wasn't paralysis. This was something far more complicated. A mind protecting itself the only way it knew how, by creating a prison that felt safer than freedom. "Auntie Ken?" Zahara's small voice interrupted. She'd been drawing quietly in the corner, but now she approached Eugene's wheelchair with the fearlessness only children possessed. "Can I show him my picture?" Kendra's instinct was to say no, to maintain professional boundaries. But she caught the way Eugene's eyes shifted immediately to Zahara, the way his attention sharpened, with an intensity she hadn't seen during her entire assessment. "If Mr. Nam approves," Kendra said carefully. Hay-Il moved forward, his presence filling the space like a storm system. He studied Zahara with the same sharp assessment he'd given Kendra, and she wondered what he saw, a small black girl with braided hair, wearing a purple dress 2 sizes too big, inherited from her cousin. Her niece's shoes were worn but clean, her smile tentative but genuine. "Show him?" Hay-Il said finally, his voice softer than before. Zahara climbed onto the small step stool beside Eugene's wheelchair, her movements careful as if she understood his fragility. She held up her drawing, a crayon image of 2 children holding hands beneath a yellow sun. "This is you and me," Zahara explained, pointing to the figures, "because you look lonely, and I get lonely too sometimes. My mom and daddy died, so I live with Auntie Ken now. She's really nice, but sometimes I miss having someone to play with." Kendra's throat tightened. Zahara rarely spoke about her parents' death so openly. The child psychologist had warned her that grief in children often emerged sideways in unexpected moments. Eugene's eyes fixed on the drawing, and Kendra saw something extraordinary, a single tear tracking down his cheek. Hay-Il made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob quickly stifled. He turned away, but not before Kendra saw the raw emotion breaking through his controlled exterior. "He hasn't cried since the day it happened," Hay-Il said roughly, his back still to them. "The doctors said it was another sign of the emotional shutdown. But tears meant feeling. Tears meant connection. Tears meant Eugene wasn't as lost as everyone had believed." Zahara reached out carefully and wiped Eugene's tear with her small finger. "It's okay to be sad," she whispered. "Auntie Ken says crying helps the hurt get smaller." Kendra's professional mind raced. This was unprecedented. Whatever connection Zahara had formed with Eugene in these few minutes had achieved more than 18 months of therapy, but she couldn't explain it, couldn't quantify it in medical terms that would satisfy the specialists who'd come before her. "Mr. Nam, I need to be honest with you," Kendra said, moving to stand beside him at the window. Up close she caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and cedar-tinged. "I don't have a magic cure. What I'm seeing here suggests that Eugene's condition is rooted in trauma so deep that his mind has chosen this shutdown as the safest option. Traditional physical therapy won't address that." Hay-Il turned to face her, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "Then what will?" "Connection," Kendra said simply. "Safety. Time. Building trust that the world won't hurt him again if he allows himself to be vulnerable. To move. To live." She gestured toward Zahara and Eugene. "Your son just responded more to my 6-year-old niece than he has to any medical professional. That tells me something important." "What?" The single word carried desperate hope. "That he's not broken. He's protecting himself." Kendra met his gaze directly. "The question is, can we create an environment where he feels safe enough to stop?" Hay-Il was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed her words. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of steel wrapped in velvet. "Name your price. Whatever you need, whoever you need to consult, any equipment, it's yours. Work with him. Not just as a therapist, but—" He struggled for words. "However this works, whatever gets results." Kendra thought of her overdue electric bill, Zahara's growing feet that needed new shoes, the student loans that followed her like shadows. She thought of what a man like Hai-il Nam could probably pay, enough to solve every financial crisis that kept her awake at night. But she also thought of Eugene's tear, of the intelligence trapped in his small body, of how her niece had reached past every clinical approach to simply see another hurting child. "I need to bring Zahara," Kendra said. "Not every day, but regularly. Whatever's happening between them, it's important. I need you to trust my process even when it doesn't look like traditional therapy. And I need honesty about your son's history, all of it, including whatever you do that might have made your family a target." She watched Hail's expression shudder immediately, danger flickering in his eyes. Most people probably backed down when he looked at them like that. Kendra held her ground. "You want me to confess my business to you?" His voice dropped to something silken and threatening. "I want you to give me context," Kendra countered. "I can't help Eugene heal from trauma if I don't understand what traumatized him. And if there's any ongoing risk to his safety, I need to know that too, because I'll be bringing a 6-year-old into this environment." The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Kendra could hear Zahara's soft voice telling Eugene about her favorite stuffed animal, completely oblivious to the tension crackling through the adult conversation. Finally, Hai-il nodded once, sharp and decisive. 3 times a week, 2-hour sessions. You bring the girl. I'll provide transportation if needed. Your car isn't safe enough for my neighborhood. The casual dismissal of her beloved Honda should have offended her. Instead, Kendra felt a flutter of something else entirely, awareness of how closely he'd observed her, of how much he'd noticed in their brief interaction. "I have other clients," she said. "I'll pay 5 times your normal rate. Adjust your schedule." It wasn't a request. Kendra should have bristled at the arrogance, at the assumption that money solved everything. But she looked at Eugene, saw the way his eyes kept tracking back to Zahara, and knew she couldn't walk away. "Fine, but we do this my way. No interference during sessions, no pushing him beyond what I determine is appropriate, and no questioning my methods." Hai-il extended his hand. "Deal." When their palms met, Kendra felt electricity arc up her arm. She told herself it was just static from the expensive carpet, just nerves from the intensity of the situation. But when she caught the slight widening of Hai-il's eyes, she knew he'd felt it too. Something had shifted in that room. Multiple somethings. And Kendra suspected that healing Eugene might be the simplest of the complications ahead. 6 weeks into their unconventional therapy arrangement, Kendra had developed a routine that would have horrified the licensing board and fascinated every child psychologist in Seattle. 3 afternoons a week, a sleek black car driven by a silent man named Mr. Kim picked up her and Zahara from the clinic. They'd ride through Seattle's expensive neighborhoods to the penthouse where Eugene waited, and something extraordinary would unfold. Zahara had become Eugene's bridge to the world. She'd sit beside his wheelchair and narrate her entire day, what she had for breakfast, the story her teacher read at school, the ladybug she'd seen on the playground. She'd show him her drawings, ask his opinion using yes or no questions he could answer with blinks. And gradually, imperceptibly, Eugene had begun to emerge from his shell. First came the facial expressions. A slight smile when Zahara told a joke, a frown when she described something sad. Then came the sounds, small hums of agreement, tiny gasps of surprise. Never words, but music nonetheless. Kendra documented everything meticulously while managing her growing awareness of Hai-il Nam's presence in her life. He was there for every session, watching from various corners of the room with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Sometimes he'd take business calls in Korean, his voice dropping to dangerous lows that reminded her exactly who he was. Other times he'd simply observe, and Kendra would feel his gaze on her like physical touch. She'd done her research after that first meeting, though Dr. Chen had advised against it. Hai-il Nam was the head of one of Seattle's most powerful Korean organized crime families. His import-export businesses were legitimate fronts for operations that no one could prove, but everyone knew existed. He controlled territories, settled disputes, and commanded loyalty through a combination of honor codes and strategic ruthlessness. He was also a father who read his son bedtime stories in Korean every night, who'd converted an entire room of his penthouse into a therapy space, who looked at Eugene like the child was his entire universe. "Auntie Ken, look!" Zahara's excited voice pulled Kendra from her thoughts. Eugene's fingers moved. Kendra's head snapped up. She'd been reviewing notes on her tablet, giving the children their usual free interaction time. Now she crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to her knees beside Eugene's wheelchair. "Show me again, sweetheart," she said softly. Zahara held up her hand, fingers spread wide. "I was showing him how many years old I am. 6. And then his fingers did a tiny wiggle. "See? Do it again, Eugene." Kendra watched carefully. Nothing happened for 10 seconds. 20. Then, there. The smallest movement of Eugene's right index finger. Voluntary movement. Intentional. "Hey, ill." She didn't realize she'd used his first name until it was out. They'd maintained careful formality for weeks, but in this moment, protocol shattered. "Come here." He was already moving, having been on a phone call by the windows. He ended it without ceremony and crossed to them, dropping into a crouch that put him eye level with his son. "Eugene?" His voice carried barely restrained hope. "Can you move your fingers for Papa?" The boy's eyes went to his father's face, and Kendra saw something she'd witnessed before in trauma victims, the fear of disappointing, of trying and failing, of hope being more painful than resignation. "It's okay if you can't right now," Kendra said gently. "The fact that you did it once means your body is remembering how. We'll celebrate that progress." But Hae-il was already reaching out, covering his son's small hand with his larger one. "Eugene-ah," he murmured in Korean, his voice breaking. "Please show Papa." The moment stretched. Then Eugene's fingers curled slightly, pressing against his father's palm. Hae-il made a sound Kendra had never heard from him, something raw and broken and beautiful all at once. He pressed his forehead to his son's, whispering rapid Korean that Kendra's limited vocabulary couldn't follow, but the emotion needed no translation. Zahara climbed onto Kendra's lap, her small body fitting perfectly against her aunt's chest. "Is Mr. Nam crying?" she whispered. "Happy tears, baby girl," Kendra whispered back, her own vision blurring. "Very happy tears." When Hae-il finally composed himself and stood, his eyes met Kendra's with an intensity that stole her breath. "You did this." "Zahara did this," Kendra corrected. "I'm just the person who knew enough to get out of the way." "No." He moved closer, and Kendra became acutely aware that they were standing just inches apart, that his height meant she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, that something electric and dangerous hummed in the space between them. "You saw what no doctor saw. You brought your niece into my home, risked your professional reputation on an unproven approach, and you gave me back my son." "We're not done yet," Kendra said, but her voice came out quieter than intended. "Finger movement isn't walking, it's progress, but—" "Kendra." The sound of her name in his voice did something to her nervous system. "Let me say thank you." Before she could respond, Mrs. Cho entered with her usual impeccable timing. "Mr. Nam, the Choi family representatives have arrived for the meeting you cannot reschedule." The shift in Hae-il was instantaneous, from vulnerable father to crime lord in the space of a heartbeat. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." After Mrs. Cho left, he turned back to Kendra. "I need to handle business. Stay as long as you'd like. Mr. Kim will drive you home." Then he did something unexpected. He approached Zahara, crouching to her level. "Thank you for being Eugene's friend. You're helping him more than you know." Zahara beamed. "He's my friend too. Can I come back tomorrow?" "We come Thursday," Kendra interjected. "Schedule, remember?" "Actually," Hae-il said, standing and reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a business card and pen, writing something on the back before handing it to Kendra. "That's my private number. If you need anything, for you or Zahara, call me. Any time." Kendra took the card, ignoring how her fingers tingled when they brushed his. "Mr. Nam, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not comfortable with—" "Your car broke down last week," he interrupted. "You took the bus to work for 3 days until you could afford the repair. Zahara had to wait at your mother's house an extra 2 hours each evening." Kendra went very still. "Have you been having me followed? I protect what matters to me." His voice was matter-of-fact. "You and Zahara matter to Eugene. That means you matter to me. If you'd called, I would have handled the car. I know you don't need my help." Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe, or frustration. "But I'm offering it anyway. Pride is expensive, Kendra." "Trust me, I know." He left before she could formulate a response, his presence leaving a vacuum in the room. "Auntie Ken?" Zahara's voice was small. "Is Mr. Nam a good guy? Or a bad guy?" Kendra looked at the card in her hand, then at Eugene, whose eyes had followed his father's exit with naked longing. She thought about the background checks she'd read, the whispered rumors at the clinic, the way other residents averted their eyes when the Nam family was mentioned. Then she thought about Hae-il's tears, his gentleness with his son, the way he'd thanked a 6-year-old with genuine respect. "I think," Kendra said slowly, "that he's complicated, like most people." But as she gathered their things to leave, she couldn't stop thinking about his offer, about how easily he'd identified her struggles, how his instinct was to solve problems with resources and power, about how dangerous it was to let someone like Hai-Il Nam see her vulnerabilities, about how some part of her, the exhausted, overwhelmed, scared part, wanted to call that number and let him fix everything. That was the thought that terrified her most of all. The crisis came on a Tuesday that started like any other. Kendra was in the middle of a session at the clinic when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your building. Fire. Zahara safe with your mother. HN." Her heart stopped. She called her mother immediately, barely breathing until she heard Zahara's voice in the background, chattering about the fire trucks. Her apartment building had experienced an electrical fire on her floor. The damage was contained, but her unit was uninhabitable. The universe had a cruel sense of timing. "Take the rest of the day," Dr. Chen said immediately. "Family emergency exemption. Go." Kendra expected to take the bus to her mother's house. Instead, Mr. Kim waited outside the clinic in the familiar black car. "Mr. Nam sent me," he said in his quiet, accented English. "I take you to your family." She should have refused, should have maintained boundaries, but she was tired and scared, and the efficient kindness of having transportation arranged broke something in her resistance. She got in the car. Mr. Kim didn't take her to her mother's house. He drove to the Nam penthouse. "There's been a misunderstanding," Kendra said, but Mr. Kim was already opening her door. Hai-Il waited in the lobby, and the sight of him in the middle of her crisis did something complicated to Kendra's chest. He wore a sharp black suit that probably cost more than her ruined apartment's entire contents, but his expression was soft with concern. "Your mother brought Zahara here," he said without preamble. "She has a shift at the hospital she couldn't miss. I assured her your niece would be safe." "You had no right," Kendra started, but he raised a hand. "Your building isn't safe for re-entry. The fire marshal's report says it'll be at least 2 weeks before repairs are complete. You need a place to stay. I have options." She didn't, really, but pride demanded she claim otherwise. "The guest suite is available. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, completely separate from the main residence." Hai-Il's tone brooked no argument. "Zahara is already upstairs with Eugene. She's fine. Better than fine. She's helping him practice finger movements." Kendra wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the professional distance that was already eroding with every session, every moment she spent in Hai-Il's presence. But then she thought about imposing on friends who had their own families, about the cost of a hotel for 2 weeks, about disrupting Zahara's fragile stability yet again. "1 week," she heard herself say, "and I pay rent." "No." "Hai-Il." "No," he repeated, firmer. "You're helping my son walk again. You think I'm concerned about the cost of a guest room." He led her upstairs, and Kendra hated how right it felt to follow him, to let someone else carry the weight for just a moment. The guest suite was nicer than any place she'd ever lived, all clean lines and comfortable furniture, windows overlooking Elliott Bay. "Auntie Ken," Zahara burst from what must be Eugene's room. "You're here, and guess what? Eugene made his whole hand move like all his fingers." The demonstration was less dramatic than Zahara's enthusiasm suggested, but Kendra's professional eye caught it immediately. Increased range of motion, better control, clear intentionality. 6 weeks ago, this child couldn't blink in response to questions. Now he was moving his hand. "That's incredible, sweetheart," Kendra said, crouching by Eugene's wheelchair. "So how does it feel?" Eugene's mouth opened slightly. He made a sound, "gah," that might have been an attempt at good. Kendra's eyes snapped to Hai-Il. Did he just try to speak? Hai-Il's voice was rough with emotion. First attempt in 3 years. The implications cascaded through Kendra's mind. Voluntary movement was returning faster than she'd anticipated. If vocal cords were engaging, if he was trying to form words, then the psychological barrier was crumbling more rapidly than any medical model predicted. "We need to adjust the therapy plan," Kendra said, her mind already racing through protocols. "Increase session frequency, add speech therapy components, maybe consult with whatever you need." Hai-Il moved closer, his presence warm at her back. "Name it." Kendra turned, forgetting for a moment that this put them face to face, barely a foot apart. His eyes were so dark they seemed black in the afternoon light, and she could see the gold flecks in them only at this proximity. Could see the small scar at his temple, the way his jaw tightened when he looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "The guest suite. The car service. Having my mother bring Zahara here. This is beyond gratitude. Is it? His voice dropped lower. You walked into my home with nothing but expertise and heart. You didn't flinch when you learned what I am. You brought a grieving child into my world and somehow made both our broken boys start healing. You think I don't recognize value when I see it? I'm not valuable, Don't. The word cut sharp. Don't diminish what you are. I've met hundreds of people who claim expertise. Most of them are selling me something. You're the first person in 3 years who saw my son as more than a medical mystery, who treated him like a child instead of a case study. Kendra's throat tightened. I'm just doing my job. No? Hay-Il lifted his hand, and for a heartbeat she thought he might touch her face. Instead, his fingers curved into a fist that dropped back to his side. You're changing everything. The moment hung between them, heavy with things neither could say. Then Zahara's voice rang out. Can we have dinner together, please? Eugene wants to show you how he can hold a spoon now. The spell broke. Hay-Il stepped back, and Kendra could breathe again. Dinner, he said. I'll have Mrs. Cho arrange something. You should rest after your morning. But Kendra couldn't rest. After Zahara and Eugene were settled watching a movie, another breakthrough, Eugene responding to visual entertainment, she found herself on the guest suite's balcony, staring at Seattle's skyline and trying to process the day. Her apartment was damaged. She was living in a crime lord's home. Her niece was befriending his son, and she was developing feelings for a man who represented everything she should run from. You look like you're planning an escape route. She turned to find Hay-Il leaning against the doorframe, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to reveal forearms marked with subtle tattoos. He looked younger like this, less untouchable. Maybe I am, Kendra admitted. He moved onto the balcony, maintaining careful distance. Would you? Escape if you could? I don't know. Honesty felt dangerous, but she was too tired for walls. A month ago, my life made sense. I knew exactly who I was. A therapist trying to survive, an aunt trying to parent, a woman with clear boundaries. Now I'm living in your home, watching miracles happen with your son, and I don't recognize my own life anymore. Miracles, Hay-Il repeated. Is that what you think this is? What would you call it? He was quiet for a long moment. Kismet. Meant to be. In Korean, we'd say inyon. Inyon. A connection forged across lifetimes. You believe in that? Kendra couldn't hide her surprise. My mother did. Something crossed his face, old pain, carefully managed. She used to say that some people come into your life like lightning, illuminating everything you'd been fumbling through in darkness. She said when that happens, you don't question it. You hold on. And is that what you do? Hold on? Hay-Il's eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. I'm trying to figure out if you'll let me. Before Kendra could respond, before she could process the weight of what he'd just confessed, Mrs. Cho's voice called from inside that dinner was ready. But as they walked back inside, Kendra felt the card in her pocket, the one with his private number. She'd been carrying it for weeks, telling herself she'd never use it. Now she wondered if that had ever been true. Some part of her had known, from that first handshake, that Hay-Il Nam was going to change everything. The question was whether she had the courage to let him. The breakthrough came on a Saturday afternoon, when Kendra wasn't even scheduled to be there. She'd taken Zahara to the Pike Place market, trying to maintain some normalcy in their increasingly complicated life. They'd been living in the guest suite for 11 days, officially temporary, but Kendra's ruined apartment was taking longer to repair than expected, and Hay-Il had stopped mentioning her leaving. It was becoming comfortable. That terrified her. Her phone rang as they examined the flower stalls. Hay-Il's name on the screen made her pulse jump. Something's wrong with Eugene. His voice was tight with controlled panic. He's trying to stand, alone. I don't know if I should stop him or... Kendra, I need you. She was in a car driven by Mr. Kim, who'd apparently been following them at a discreet distance, within 5 minutes. When she burst into Eugene's room, the sight stopped her cold. The 7-year-old was on his feet, one small hand gripping the parallel bars of the walking frame, his entire body trembling with effort. Tears streamed down his face, but his eyes were determined, fierce with something that looked like rage against his own limitations. Hay-Il stood frozen 3 feet away, clearly torn between helping and respecting his son's obvious desire to do this alone. How long has he been standing? Kendra asked quietly. 10 minutes. Hay-Il's voice cracked. He pulled himself up, and I don't know if his legs can support him, if he's going to hurt himself. Eugene. Kendra moved closer but didn't touch. Can you hear me, sweetheart? One blink. Yes. Are you in pain? 2 blinks. No. Do you want to try walking? Long pause. Then 1 blink. Definitive and sure. Okay. Kendra positioned herself on one side while gesturing Hey Il to the other. We're going to be right here. Not to catch you, but to steady you if you need it. You're in control. 1 step or 10 steps or no steps. It's your choice, understand? 1 blink. Zahara appeared in the doorway, still holding the flowers they'd bought. Eugene, you're standing. The boy's head turned slightly toward her voice, and Kendra saw the shift in his expression. Determination strengthening, fed by an audience who believed in him. Eugene's right foot slid forward. 1 inch, 2 inches. His entire body shook with the effort, muscles relearning what trauma had locked away. His left foot followed, dragging slightly but moving. A step. Hey Il made a choked sound. Kendra felt tears on her own cheeks. That's it, she encouraged softly. Just like that. Your body remembers. It's been waiting for you to feel safe enough to try. Another step, then another. Eugene's breathing was labored, his face twisted with concentration, but he was walking. After 3 years of paralysis that had defeated every medical expert, he was walking. He made it 5 steps before his legs gave out. Hey Il caught him instantly, dropping to his knees and pulling his son against his chest. Eugene's small hands, those hands that had barely moved weeks ago, came up to grip his father's shirt. Papa. The word was slurred, unpracticed but unmistakable. Papa. Hey Il's composure shattered completely. He held his son and wept, the kind of crying that came from a place too deep for shame, too pure for pride. His shoulders shook, and Kendra heard him murmuring in Korean, prayers or promises or both. Zahara climbed onto Kendra's hip, her small arms wrapping around her aunt's neck. He did it, she whispered. He did it, Auntie Ken. Yeah, baby girl, he did. After Eugene was settled in his chair, exhausted but wearing a smile that transformed his entire face, Hey Il pulled Kendra into his study. The room was all dark wood and expensive art, but she barely registered the surroundings. She was too focused on the man who closed the door and turned to face her with an expression of raw vulnerability. I owe you everything, he said simply. You owe me nothing. This is what I do. Kendra. He moved closer, and she felt the now familiar electricity that sparked whenever they occupied the same space. For 3 years, I've lived in darkness. I lost my wife to violence I brought into our lives. I watched my son disappear into trauma I couldn't fix. I've commanded hundreds of men, built an empire, but I couldn't save the 2 people who mattered most. His hand lifted, and this time he didn't pull back. His fingers traced her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted everything his reputation promised. Then you walked into my home with your second-hand blazer and your worn shoes and your niece who'd also lost everything. You didn't see a crime lord. You didn't see a paycheck. You saw a father and a son who needed help, and you gave it without hesitation. Hey Il, I'm in love with you. The words dropped like stones into still water. I know I shouldn't be. I know my world is dangerous and complicated and you deserve someone clean and simple, but I stopped being able to lie to myself about this weeks ago. Kendra's breath caught. Every rational thought screamed that she should step back, create distance, protect herself and Zahara from entanglement with a man whose business was built on crime. But her heart, her foolish, hopeful heart, recognized truth when it heard it. You scare me, she admitted. Not because of what you are, but because of how you make me feel. Like I could trust you to catch me if I fell, and trusting people has never ended well for me. I know. His thumb brushed her lower lip, and she shivered. Your parents divorced when you were 12. Your sister was the only stable thing in your life. Then you lost her too. Now you're raising Zahara alone because you're terrified that asking for help means giving someone the power to let you down. Stop profiling me, she whispered, but there was no heat in it. I can't. His forehead rested against hers. Because understanding you is the only way to show you that I see you. All of you. The strength and the fear and the exhaustion you hide behind efficiency. The way you sacrifice everything for Zahara while telling yourself it's not sacrifice. The dreams you've deferred so long, you've almost forgotten they exist. How do you? Because I'm the same. His confession came quietly. I've built everything on control, because losing control cost me my wife. I've kept everyone at distance, because closeness meant vulnerability. Then you crashed through every wall I'd built, and I can't go back to who I was before. Kendra closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of him, the solid reality that contradicted every reason she should run. This is insane. Probably. Your life is dangerous. Yes. I have a 6-year-old to protect. I have 100 men whose job is protecting what matters to me. You and Zahara matter to me. His hands framed her face, tilting her head up until she met his eyes. I know you're scared, but I'm asking you to be brave enough to believe that not everyone leaves, that some people stay and fight and build something worth protecting. Hail, he kissed her, soft at first, tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when her hands fisted in his shirt and she rose on her toes to kiss him back, the gentleness transformed into something deeper, a promise sealed in the press of lips, the tangle of breath, the desperate hope that broken people could find wholeness together. When they finally broke apart, Kendra was trembling. I need time, she whispered, to figure out if this can work, if we can work. Take all the time you need. Hale's thumb traced her swollen lips. I'll be here. However long it takes, I'll be here. From down the hall came the sound of children's laughter, Zahara and Eugene, finding joy in each other despite their wounds. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe healing wasn't about erasing damage or returning to who you were before. Maybe it was about finding someone who saw your scars and chose to stay anyway, who understood that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up for the messy, complicated, beautiful work of building something real. Stay tonight, Hail said. Not in the guest suite. With me. Just I'd stay. Kendra thought of all the reasons she should refuse. Then she thought of Eugene's steps, of Zahara's smile, of the impossible thing they'd all created together. A family, built from fragments. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. And in the morning, when she woke in Hail's arms while dawn painted Seattle gold, she thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where broken people became whole. Years had passed since that Saturday afternoon, when Eugene took his first steps. The boy who'd been trapped in silence now ran through the halls of their home. Yes, their home, because Kendra had stopped pretending the guest suite was temporary months after that first kiss. She stood in the kitchen of their expanded penthouse, watching through the window as Eugene and Zahara played in the private garden Hail had built for them. The teenagers were inseparable. Eugene at 14, Zahara at 13, the siblings they'd chosen to become rather than the broken children circumstances had forced them to be. You're thinking too loud. Hail's arms wrapped around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. The simple gold band on his left hand caught the light, matched to the one she wore, symbols of the wedding that had united their fractured pieces into something beautiful. Just remembering, Kendra said, leaning into his warmth, how impossible this all seemed once. Nothing's impossible when you're too stubborn to accept defeat. His voice carried the mix of humor and affection that had become her favorite sound. You taught me that. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd transformed from dangerous crime lord to devoted husband and father. He'd stepped back from the darkest parts of his business, restructuring his empire toward legitimate operations that let him sleep with a clear conscience. It hadn't been easy. Some days the past still haunted them, but they'd built this anyway. This life, this family, this fierce and complicated love. Eugene wants to apply to medical school, Kendra said. He told me this morning, wants to help other kids who get lost in trauma. Hail's eyes shone. Of course he does. He learned from the best. From the garden came laughter, bright and unbroken, the sound of children who'd survived the worst and found joy anyway. Thank you, Hail murmured against her temple, for seeing us when we were invisible, for staying when you should have run, for loving us when we were unlovable. Kendra kissed him, deep and sure and full of every tomorrow they'd build together. Always, she whispered, I'll always stay. And she meant it.